When Helldivers 2 was first released, I had no interest in joining the forces of Super Earth. I had just gotten some of my friends into Fortnite, my paycheck certainly wasn't any bigger, but everywhere I looked, I kept hearing about this game. And it seemed like there was a community forming the likes of which I had never seen. So, I threw down 40 bucks and joined the war against the bugs and the bots. And I tell you what, I never looked back. I'm Eric, welcome to Utini, and today we're going to tell you why it's about time you started spreading some managed democracy. You may be wondering how a multiplayer game with no PvP about a place called Super Earth has completely changed the gaming landscape. And today, we're going to get into all that, but we need to start with the premise, because it all starts at the top. In the world of Helldivers 2, there is a utopic paradise called Super Earth. You may recognize it, it's very much like regular Earth. And as a Helldiver, your mission is to take the ideal of Super Earth, which is expanding the glory of patriotism and democracy across the galaxy, where you fight off the forces of evil that currently come in two forms: automatons, robots, and terminids, bugs. In order to accomplish this goal, you board your ship, you fly to a planet currently in conflict, and complete missions alongside other Helldivers to help liberate that planet one measly percentage point at a time. And that's it! That's the game. I mean, can't you see why it's been such a genre-changing success? Alright, yeah, we probably need to go a bit deeper. See, the success of Helldivers actually started before the game even launched, thanks to one of the most interesting marketing campaigns we've ever seen. From the moment the game was announced, it did feel like this was a game being launched by a studio, because it was treated like a satirical propaganda machine getting ready to launch a political campaign. It was risky, but it was funny, and somehow people started talking. A lot. Now, one thing we haven't mentioned so far is that yes, Helldivers 2 is a sequel to Helldivers 1. The gameplay is very different, but technically there was a player base for the original game that should have let us know how successful this game would be, right? Well, Helldivers 1, at its peak, hosted about 7,000 players, which is pretty small. And during the peak of the sequel launch, Helldivers 2 had 700,000. So yeah, it was a bit of a surprise. But here's where something amazing happened that changed the future of this game. Because if you don't know, a buggy launch filled with crashes and disconnections can destroy your franchise completely. I mean, you lose the chance to build community, you miss out on the initial surge of popularity, and you end up having to build back faith, like No Man's Sky or Cyberpunk 2077. But Helldivers 2 somehow stayed beloved. The community formed around the crashes, messages of support flooded social media from players and developers alike, and the real legacy of Helldivers 2 was born. Which begs the question, how'd they do it? How did a game franchise change its entire gameplay model, crash at launch, and then instantly build an active player base that outpaced the original by 100-fold? Well, there's three main pillars of the Helldivers experience that made this possible and threatened to change the industry forever: tone and marketing, remarkable evolution, and dedication to players. Now, we've already touched on the tone a bit, but there's so much more that makes Helldivers stand out, even if it feels a little familiar.
Young people from all over the globe are joining up to fight for the future.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part too.
This clip from 1997's Starship Troopers has been a wildly popular meme over the last few years, but it also encapsulates the vibe of Helldivers to a T. In this game, you are a grunt on the front lines of a war that is comically macho, patriotic, and star-spangled awesome. It's hilarious, violent, and most importantly, 100% committed to being tongue-in-cheek. And this tone is established the moment the game begins. From a tutorial that welcomes you into the glorious society of Super Earth while simultaneously admitting that you are completely expendable in the name of managed democracy, Helldivers 2 ensures that you buy into the bit from the first moment you boot up the game, and it never lets go for a second. Now, in other games, this tone could be really intense at the top and then dilute as the gameplay loop begins, focusing more on team objectives, unlocking battle pass levels, things like that. But the Helldivers don't forget about their patriotism in such weak fashion.
Have a taste of democracy!
Every single voice line reflects the glory of Super Earth, relishes in the glory of combat, and pushes the hilarious satire of the game's world to the brink, even when you're surrounded by fire tornadoes. I'm burning! No! And while I absolutely want to give props to every voice actor and script writer that gave their talents to the majesty of Super Earth's fighting force, that is merely the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the tonal perfection of Helldivers 2. Because, well, it hasn't stopped. Remember those missions that we briefly mentioned earlier that Helldivers undertake to retake planets? Well, we'll cover those in a bit more detail later, but the one thing you need to know is that the active universe of Helldivers 2 is constantly in motion. Hundreds of thousands of players are constantly fighting to gain ground in the real-time war against the bots and the bugs. And that could all get chaotic real quickly, unless we had orders from command. See, other game studios and game accounts use their social media to inform players about upcoming updates or to celebrate milestones in the community. That's great. That's lovely. But Helldivers don't need patch notes. They need transmissions from on high. Every Helldivers 2 post is in character. Plain and simple. Democracy and loyalty officers use these channels to inform soldiers about the status of the ongoing war and to reinforce the necessity of sacrifice in the name of freedom and democracy. So, whether that's responding to a community milestone with a congratulations of service, or addressing a potential leak with a nothing to see here, soldier, move along, the developers never break character and encourage every player to play along, which they do. Oh, they do. By leading from the front with this hilarious yet organic connection, the devs have essentially told the players that their dedication to the game and the bit is ongoing, so the players respond in kind. Every reply to posts on Twitter or Reddit is seen as a response from a loyal Helldiver to their superiors. Players will address treasonous behavior if anyone questions the devs. They will praise the efforts of their fellow compatriots. And this immersive experience outside the game ensures that no gamer ever has a moment to stop thinking about their universal conquest in the name of Super Earth. And finally, this masterclass in marketing has ensured that this inclusive, hilarious tone has made its way directly into the gameplay itself, inadvertently creating an intensely supportive player base. When the game first launched, social media was flooded with videos of gamers speaking in character on their mics to total strangers, like laughing hysterically as they got blown up by their friends or massacred by an army. And in an environment like multiplayer gaming, where mic chatter can be toxic, to say the least, this tone of chaotic brotherhood and immersive ridiculous is, well, fun. And it turns out, when you create a game that encourages its player base to play along and have fun on your servers, you have time to put your efforts into actual productivity, which leads to the second pillar of the Helldivers experience, the real-time evolution. Now, aside from its unique and wonderful tone, the main thing that sets Helldivers apart from other multiplayer juggernauts like Fortnite and Call of Duty is the fact that Helldivers 2 is a part of a real-time, ongoing conflict. And when you boot up the game and take a look at the map, it will always be different than the last time you logged on, because all the progress that other players have made has affected the universe. Planets are lost and conquered in real time, and sometimes specific missions are handed down from command to encourage players to work on certain goals together. And this would all be well and dandy if it weren't for one thing: Joel. Joel is a mythic dev working on Helldivers, and early on in the game's existence, it was made clear that he was single-handedly responsible for the chessboard that is the war against the automatons and the Terminids. So anytime that players feel like they have a handle on the war, well, Joel throws in a little reminder that war is never easy. Think the automatons were a little weak? Cool, they have vehicles now. Think the last few missions have been too easy? How about invisible ships in the sky? See, Helldivers doesn't have a Battle Pass map that clearly delineates where the game will go over the coming months. It has Joel and his psychotic machinations. And the idea of giving the whole community somewhat of a deity to look at with playful disdain has been incredibly fun and a brilliant way to insert new mechanics into the game. And most importantly, Arrowhead, the company that created Helldivers, didn't have to do any of that. They could have just created a game with small objectives that were repeated over and over and over, but the combination of intentional community efforts with the chaos of Joel have changed not only the game of Helldivers, but also the lore. Let's take the most famous example of this, Malevelon Creek. Now, early on in the life of Helldivers 2, there was a planet called Malevelon Creek. It was incredibly hard to liberate, but time and time again, players kept flocking to it. And because of the difficulty and constant fatalities, the legend of the planet began to grow online. And eventually, a major order was handed down by command for players to focus on the liberation of Malevelon Creek. Helldivers responded with fervor, and the planet was finally taken, with every player receiving a cape cosmetic honoring the sacrifice of the fallen. Over a planet that, let me remind you, doesn't really exist, but everyone played along. And because the devs knew the players were on their side, they were empowered to expand the game into an event that was truly awesome. And of course, days later, there was a massive invasion on another side of space that created even more lore, and it goes on and on and on. But the reason all of this works is the incredible bond of trust and communication between developer and player, the likes of which we've never really seen in a modern day shooter. Because nowadays, developers are often thought to be at the mercy of their players, and it hinders the development of a true community at every step. You can't just drop random vehicles into a single game without telling anyone. You can't add entirely new environmental challenges without a patch note that explains everything. But you can in Helldivers, because the game is always changing. The war is continuous, but the tone is consistent, and that magical alchemy takes away the pressure of daily grind and replaces it with the encouragement to jump back into the story you love, because you can't wait to see what's been created in the meantime. And that ties into our final point, and possibly the one that has the most potential to change the gaming industry: the dedication to the players. Now, gaming has had a really tough couple of years. Sure, we've had some incredible titles released that gave us great stories and innovative gameplay and everything like that, but there's also been a lot of disappointment. Huge studios have been plagued by layoffs, despite reporting record profits. Once lauded franchises have been maligned repeatedly for stale releases and an almost predatory attitude towards microtransactions. And the gap between developer and consumer has seemed wider than ever. And clearly, that hasn't been the case with Helldivers. And let me be clear, Arrowhead Studios, again, didn't have to go down this road. The uber-patriotic satire could have been a great marketing tool that eventually got forgotten. But instead, it's been carried through and become a defining part of the experience. They could have blamed the initial launch issues on the player base being too greedy, but instead, the CEO literally told players not to buy the game until they fixed the servers. Every piece of Helldivers tells the player that they are deserving of a good product. And as a gamer, that feels almost weird because of how unusual it is compared to the larger gaming landscape. This particular example also goes to show how dedicated the Helldivers team is to full transparency, both when it applies to big issues and those that are seemingly inconsequential. Sometimes they'll admit they want to avoid any PvP multiplayer because they want to stop the toxicity that type of game usually creates. On the other hand, they'll also admit that they'll never get rid of friendly fire in Helldivers because, quote, it's hilarious. And you know what? They're right. This constant communication in-game, on socials, and from developer interviews ensures that the player base of Helldivers constantly feels connected to the people who are actively working on the game. And when you add in the final note that it retails at $30 less than the average game nowadays, well, it's no wonder that this miraculous game continues to flourish. Helldivers 2 shouldn't have worked. This was a game from a small studio, it sold for $40, it was not littered with microtransactions, and there was no PvP. So basically everything that defies the current landscape of multiplayer gaming. But instead, it has become one of the most beloved games of the year. And if other game companies are paying attention, there's a decent chance that the entire industry is about to shift towards games that dedicate themselves to a unique tone, towards games that respect and engage with their player base, towards games that value transparency, joy, and straight up fun over the idea of how many dollars they can squeeze out of their players every second, towards games that let you hug your freaking teammates whenever you want. All that to say, I didn't know what to expect from Helldivers 2. But I'm so glad that this team inspired a community so incredible that I had no choice but to give it a try. It's not too late for you either. After all, Helldiver, the war still rages on, the front still needs soldiers, and it's never too late to spread some good old managed democracy. Until next time, may the force be with you.